Janus Razor by Jim Lee. Part 3, Reflection. Hey, did you happen to see the most beautiful girl in the world? And if you did, was she crying? Hey, if you happen to see the most beautiful girl that walked out on me, tell her I'm sorry. Tell her I need my baby. Oh, won't you tell her that I love her? I woke up this morning, realized what I had done. I stood alone in the cold gray dawn. I knew I'd lost my morning sun. I lost my head and I said some things. Now comes the heartaches that the morning brings. I know I'm wrong and I couldn't see. I let my world slip away from me. Charlie Rich, The Most Beautiful Girl. From a very young age, Jacqueline had been told time and again by various men in her life that she was the most beautiful girl in the world. Her father said so, her uncle said so, her fifth-grade teacher, Mr. Simmons, had said so. And there had been others as well. But it wasn't until years later that she had occasion to evaluate the other behaviors which sometimes accompanied such compliments. It wasn't until it was far too late that she realized that her life's experiences were neither normal nor any fault of hers. If her mother had been alive, she could surely have asked her. But Jacqueline's mother passed when she was only 4, and the only memory she had of her was a vague and fuzzy memory of a soft, singing voice, soothing her in the dark and banishing some monster from the realm of nightmares. The tiny Midwestern town from which she came had a very efficient grapevine for gossip, and although the other girls should have been nurturing and supportive in a perfect world, Jacqueline came to understand as she entered the hyper-competitive world of high school that this too was not as it should be. The simple truth was that she was uncommonly attractive, and even the most comely of the corn-fed hayseed girls looked lumpy and homely beside her. So they instinctively reviled her, sensing rather than actually knowing of her shame, and seized upon it like a pack of starving junkyard dogs might descend upon the carcass of some roadkill animal. When Jacqueline shrank away from these assaults, her sisters-turned-predators savaged her all the more. It was as if they had smelled blood, and it had driven them mad. Consequently, feeling no sense of refuge at home, and in flight from the company of girls her age, she began to seek out boys to use as a shield. She targeted the most popular and athletic, and found them easy prey. They wanted the same things it seemed men always wanted, and she was prepared to offer these in trade, but once again she did not fully grasp the nature of the arrangement. As she would learn, boys did want what she had to offer. Some were shy about obtaining her favors, others were not. But in public, they would act strangely. They were content to go to the movie house with her, but they never wanted just to hang out with her, not where anyone else might see them together. They were all too eager to go to her house, but she was never invited to their homes in return. This puzzled her, but she didn't worry it over much. There was time, and though the other girls at school no doubt still said things behind her back, they mostly kept their distance, and this seemed an improvement. The boys called her Jackie, seeming disinclined to bother with her full name, and she embraced this new identity with a will. It wasn't until she started going with Jason that she decided she wanted more. Jason had previously been regularly seen in the company of Cynthia Hammond. Cynthia was one of the more vocal of the mean-spirited, whey-faced wretches who called out hurtful things from time to time. Usually these snipes were about her clothing. Jackie's father was, at best, a man of modest means, whereas Cynthia and her friends came from the more well-to-do families. After one particularly nasty comment about her jeans, comparing Jackie to one of the workmen on her father's ranch, Jackie decided it was time to get back at Cynthia. Cindy, a nickname which the girl hated by all accounts, was nothing special to look at. She was still flat-chested, and Jackie was sure that Jason would be eager to upgrade. She wasted no time in getting his attention, and she had not been mistaken. He was very eager indeed, and not much time had passed before she had taken him to all her secret places and shared with him her most precious and treasured dreams. He was different from the other boys. He didn't play on any of the sports teams. He certainly could have, but he said his old man called them a waste of time and energy. Instead, he had been learning how to work on restoring old cars, and in his spare time, he worked on an old Chevy that was going to be his first car when he got his license. Jason listened to her when she spoke. He didn't just spend his time trying to find ways to turn any conversation back to himself. It was during one of these times of quiet intimacy that he had made the mistake of telling her he thought she was the most beautiful girl in the world, and she had almost run away from him right there and then. But of course, there was no way he could have known how much she had come to hate hearing that, or why. Instead, she changed the subject. She asked him why he had never invited her to come to his house. "My place is a dump," he said cheerfully. "I didn't think you'd want to go there. I get away from it whenever I can. But if you want to come over, it's your funeral. We can go right now." Jackie was thrilled. She hugged Jason, and she heard him say, "Geez, Jackie, if I had known you'd get so excited, I'd have invited you a long time ago." His house, as it turned out, was about the same size as hers, but there were several disabled vehicles on blocks in various states of disrepair in the yard. He led her past these into the house proper. The front hall was lined with stacks of old newspapers. The air was thick with the smell of ancient newsprint, which barely masked the greasy scent of what might have been diesel fuel or gasoline or both. Jason's father worked as a mechanic, and the house seemed to testify to this fact. Jason led her to the kitchen. "This is my dad," he told her. The man seated at the table was peering closely at a carburetor which had been completely disassembled on the table atop spread-out newspapers. He looked up with an expression which seemed, at first, unenthusiastic or even perturbed, but no sooner had Jackie registered that look than it was replaced by a warmer smile. "Dad, this is Jackie," Jason said. The man beamed. "Nice to meet you, young lady. I'd shake hands with you, but as you can see," he said, trailing off. He held up his hands in explanation, which were covered in black grease. "Claire, Jason's home, and he's brought a lady with him." Jason's father hollered down the hall as he returned his attention to the scattered bits of metal before him. From the other room, a shuffling of more newspaper could be heard, followed by a woman's voice. "Oh, Jason, I wish you had given me some warning. This place looks a sty, with your father's mess everywhere, and I wanted to make a good impression. I've so been wanting to meet—" The woman broke off as she rounded the corner. "Oh," she said. In a fashion which was the polar opposite of the father's reaction, the woman's expression had been cheerful and pleasant as she entered the room, and then suddenly iced over like a pond in February into a dour's scowl. "Mom, this is Jackie," Jason introduced, seemingly unaware of the disapproval Jackie could feel stabbing out of those eyes, biting into her like daggers. This is something of a surprise, Jason," she said coldly. "I thought you were dating that nice Cynthia Hammond girl." The father looked up briefly at this, and then returned his attention to his carburetor. "Nah, that was before. I broke up with Cindy last week. Jackie's—" Jason responded, but his mother cut him off. "I think I already know plenty about Jackie," the woman replied icily. "May I speak to you in the living room, Jason?" Jason looked stunned by his mother's rudeness. He glanced over at his father, but the man didn't look up from his project. He cast a woeful look at Jackie, and then followed his mother quietly into the other room, where she began to berate him, and her, without any apparent regard as to whether or not her voice could be heard from around the corner. Jackie stood there awkwardly, unable to move or even speak in her own defense. "What are you doing hanging around with that little slut?" Jason's mother hissed. Jason got no further than the first consonant before she squashed his reply and forged on. "I know who she is. That little trollop has been handed around by every boy in town." This wasn't true, of course, but this woman hardly seemed to Jackie to be the kind who would be daunted by trifling details like these. "Listen, Jason, you don't have what it takes to go to college. You're going to be a blue-collar working man all your days, just like your father. And in this town, the only way you're going to have any chance at a future is to settle down with a nice girl from a nice family." "Don't we have a nice family, Mom?" Jason managed to interject, as the woman took a deep breath before her next assault. "Don't get smart with me, young man. You know very well what I'm talking about. Your father and I have to scrimp and save to have anything in this world. This week I had to choose between groceries and paying the bill for the refrigerator repairman who had to fix the mess your father made of our refrigerator. Is that how you want to spend your life, Jason? Barely breaking even? Cynthia Hammond's father owns the largest ranch in the county, and he has a fleet of tractors and other equipment that will need someone to look after them, Jason, and Joe Haggerty is getting ready to retire in a few years. Being in Mr. Hammond's good graces is your best chance of taking what you've learned from your father and making a life for yourself." "But, Mom, I love Jackie," Jason answered softly. "I don't care about trying to marry a girl just so I can wait around for her father to die." "Oh, that's just great. Love doesn't put food on the table, Jason. Love doesn't keep the pipes from freezing in the winter. Love doesn't put children through college. Money does these things, Jason. Money. And the only way you're going to ever have any is if you stop acting like a spoiled child and accept the facts. And the fact is, you have no future with this girl. And if you haven't got enough sense to see that, then I'll have to make your decision for you. I forbid you from seeing this girl, Jason." Jason stomped back into the kitchen. His face looked hot, red with pent-up anger or frustration. "Dad," he shouted, "she can't do that. Tell her she can't do that." The man looked up. He did so with a weary sigh, and at once Jackie thought that this was a common thing for him, practiced over many long years. Instead of looking at his son, the man looked at Jackie. The lines in his face seemed deeper suddenly, as if he had aged a decade or more just from sitting there. She saw his expression, and she recognized it all too well. It was the face of a man who contemplated a base betrayal, something he knew full well he should not do, but which he nevertheless intended to go ahead and do all the same. "Jason," he said dully, "you know your mother only wants what's best for you." "Ugh, God! Doesn't anyone care what I want? How I feel?" Jason wailed, throwing his hands up in disgust. His mother froze, and the faintest hint of a sickening smile flickered on her face before disappearing behind a mask of parental concern. "Of course, Jason, how you feel is important. But if you can't demonstrate good decision-making skills like an adult, then you certainly can't be trusted with a responsibility as big as driving a car." "What? No!" Jason protested. His father glared at her, and then, without a word, went outside. His final sentiment on the matter was the wooden bang of the screen door as he let it sweep the full course of its spring and slam behind him. Jason's mother grinned a vindictive, hateful little smile. "Driving a car is a very serious responsibility. I thought you could be trusted with it. But of course, you will be able to get your license, regardless of how your father and I feel, when you're 21. Jackie looked at the woman and marveled, not for the first time, that anyone could take such obvious glee in tormenting their own child. Jason wailed wordlessly and sat down in the chair his father had vacated, with his head in his hands. Jackie reflected that Jason's resemblance to the older man was more pronounced in his anguish. She knew she had already lost here. She knew that the car represented freedom to Jason. The idea of freedom being held dangling over one's head for 5 long years would seem to any 16-year-old like an eternity. Jackie knew he would obey this woman. He would hate his mother for it, but he would still obey, because although what she and Jason had shared was special, its roots hadn't yet had a chance to dig deep, certainly not like the ones his mother had cultivated. Jackie decided to do the only thing that she could do, the only course that would let her come out of this with a shred of dignity. Without saying a word, she turned and walked back down the hall and out the door. Like the father, she let the wooden screen door slam in its frame with the same flat bang. Behind her, she heard Jason cry out her name, but she heard no sound of footsteps pursuing her to prevent her departure. The last thing she heard from the house was Jason's mother's voice, too low to be intelligible, making some soft cooing sound, her brand of comfort. As she passed, a voice called to her from the garage. The father stood there. His eyes were cast downward. He did not attempt to raise them to make eye contact. He held a large pipe wrench in his blackened, greasy hands. "I'm sorry," he said softly. She stopped and turned to look at him. "Yes," she said, beginning to feel her hate and anger boil over at last. She wanted to spring upon him like a tigress and slice his face to ribbons with her long fingernails. In some way, in her head, this was happening, even as she quietly said, "Yes, you are," before turning once more and walking down the driveway. The old man slumped, head still lowered, and shuffled back into the garage. From the end of the driveway, a few moments later, Jackie could hear the racket of furious metallic banging as his muted shame found an outlet by bashing some vehicle with the pipe wrench over and over. We are all broken, Jackie thought. We are all broken beyond repair, yet not so broken that we cannot see what we could have been, she reflected. She wept bitterly. This thought became the guiding principle of her life over the next several years. She shied away from nothing out of any sense of self-preservation. She didn't care enough about what happened to her to become emotionally invested in any particular outcome. No matter how it turned out, she was convinced it would be the worst it could be for everyone. Jackie did see Jason one last time, the day she finally found a reason to leave home and seek her fortune in the wider world. There was a bar on the west side of town, frequented by truckers due to its proximity to the interstate. She had begun to prowl the parking lot, waiting for one of the drivers to call out to her. They had money, and they were lonely, and they would buy her booze she couldn't get herself, being underage. Across the street stood an old drugstore, and Jackie had gone over to pick up some mints, when one of her friends had told her kissing her had been like kissing an ashtray. She had made as much of a habit of the mints as she had of the cigarettes. She had just bought some mints and a bottle of Orange Crush and was exiting the drugstore when a shiny red antique Chevy Camaro convertible pulled up. Jason was behind the wheel, and she saw the big grin on his face dissolve when he recognized her. Hanging out of the passenger side was Cindy Hammond. "Well, well, well, if it isn't the Skank Supreme! It looks like you finally found your true calling, lot lizard. Aren't you glad you finally came to your senses and dumped this whore, Jason? I mean, look at all the things we have," Cindy crowed, stroking the glossy finish of the car door. "And look at what she has. Nothing. Except maybe diseases," Cindy cawed with laughter. "I do have one thing that you don't have, Cindy," Jackie replied pleasantly, switching the bottle of Orange Crush to her right hand, gripping it by the neck, as she approached the passenger door of the Camaro. "Oh yeah? What's that?" Cindy bristled, wrinkling her nose at Jackie in disgust. In a single sweeping motion, Jackie brought the bottle up and around and smashed it across the bridge of Cindy's nose. Blood began to pour copiously from the deep gouges made by the shattered glass, and Cindy howled in agony, clutching at her face, as the blood began to overwrite the spreading orange splashes on her white blouse with bright vermilion. Jackie leaned in close to the screaming girl. "I have a nose that isn't broken," she said calmly. She dropped the shattered remnant of the bottle and walked back toward the bar. Jason was screaming something, but it was almost as if he didn't exist. And as she walked away, Jackie felt as though Cindy, the car, the drugstore, and all the town that lay beyond it all faded, simply faded out of existence. A driver in a red Freightliner called out to her, breaking the spell. "Hey, baby, going my way?" Why not, she thought to herself. We're all broken, so why not? The driver looked a little surprised as she climbed up onto the passenger side, and he unlocked the door. She hauled herself in and slammed the door. "Wow, I didn't expect to get lucky with that old line. I didn't even tell you where I'm going," the driver chortled. "And where are we going?" Jackie asked coquettishly. "Denver," he replied matter-of-factly. "Sounds as good as any place," she said, turning in the seat to face him. "Let's get mile high." She hadn't wanted to be a cliché. She didn't go to California, to Hollywood, to L.A., where all the world's lost girls seemed to end up. Denver had plenty of action to keep her entertained, and coming from the Midwest, she felt no particular compunction to seek the sea and L.A.'s beaches. So, for the next few years, in Denver she had stayed, hopping from man to man, setting down no roots, but never going hungry. She learned that there was a warrant for her arrest back home, for some kind of assault or something. She let the news just wash over her, without letting it carry her away. We're all broken, she mused, and then she just let the thought of the warrant slip out of her head. It was better that way. When the Razor had fallen, she was dating a guy who was working at a radio station. And now the whole world was finally catching on that they were all broken. And when they said some people were going to go look at the broken part, she insisted that Kurt take her along. She wanted to see it. She wanted to stare into this mirror that had broken the world for real, and see what there was to see. And when she saw it, and all the men had shivered and practically pissed themselves over what to do about it, she looked at the bottle in her hand — she always seemed to have a bottle in her hand these days — and said they should throw something at it. And Kurt chimed in. He loved to take orders, and was so happy to do as he was told. But his bottle just disappeared. This won't do, she thought. Could she disappear? She thought she might be able to. She hastily tied a string to her bottle to test her theory. If she could pull it back out after throwing it in, it meant that it could survive the trip, and if it did, she meant to follow, no matter what anyone else might think of the idea. She held her string and she threw the bottle. In her mind's eye, that wasn't her face in the reflection. It was some girl she hated. She threw the bottle at that hated face. And as the bottle was swallowed in the reflection, somewhere in her memory she heard a voice. Her name was Cynthia. And with the shock of that memory dawning on her face, she was pulled into the mirror. And then the sun vanished from the sky. Jackie looked up, and where the Colorado sun had blazed down from overhead a moment before, night's velvet blanket now lay above her, sprinkled with pinpricks of light shining through it. Yet there was enough light to see by. Not far off, globes of light shone at regular intervals. Streetlights, perhaps? In any case, there was enough illumination from these to tell that the highway beneath her feet was gone. She was standing amid rows of vegetation. A farm of some kind, then. She stood still for a moment, trying to rationalize the situation, and found she could imagine no scenario which could explain her circumstances but one. She was inside the mirror. She turned to look behind her and started with a little yelp when she saw someone standing behind her. It was, of course, only her reflection in the dim light. The mirror was behind her now, and the poor lighting had fooled her brain into thinking the field continued off in rows behind her. However, the little outburst of sound had not gone unnoticed. There was a soft whirring sound a short distance away, and then there began a series of soft beeps, one every 2 seconds or so. Not knowing where "here" was, specifically, she thought the best thing to do was to go back. She reeled in her bottle, using the string she was still holding, and turned to face the mirror again. Now she was looking at an almost entirely black silhouette of herself. "I'll be back soon," she said to the strange place around her, knowing that among the things she'd want to have handy when she returned would be a simple flashlight. She tossed the bottle at the mirror and clutched the string tightly. The bottle fell to the ground. Specifically, when it reached the mirror, it stopped its forward motion without making a sound. It didn't bounce away from the reflective surface. It simply touched it and then slid down. When it reached the ground, it rolled down the little mound of dirt into a small hollow. Jackie reached out to touch the mirror directly. Like the bottle, there was no sound, nor was there any sensation. Her hand simply stopped moving forward at the place where it looked like she was touching her reflection, but she could not push forward, nor did she feel any resistance pressing back, only that she could not move forward no matter how hard she tried. She tried pounding the surface with her fists, but there was no sound and no sensation. It was simply fruitless. While she stood and boggled at this, she became aware that sound of the beeping object she had heard before was gradually increasing in frequency, now about once every second. She decided that, for the time being at least, she would have to abandon the mystery of the mirror. Perhaps there would be answers when there was light. For now, she decided, it would be best, if that beeping were some form of alarm, to make herself scarce, just in case someone were monitoring it and decided to come and investigate. Without any real light, she thought she might fall into a hole in the dark, and so purposed to head for the streetlights and see where those might lead. She set out toward them, moving slowly, and noticed that the pitch of the beeping sound had increased slightly as well. As she made her way to the row of lights, she noticed that the source of the sound seemed to be moving along with her, always slightly off to the right of a spot directly ahead of her. This made her panic a little bit, and she began to run. The sounds increased in both pitch and frequency now, and she started to feel real panic try to take hold. A part of her wanted to simply bolt blindly like a deer. It took a great effort of will to ignore that part and continue to move toward the lights. Her heart was thudding in her chest as she stepped into the nearest circle of light. She stopped. That sound wasn't her heart thudding. There was some enormous thing moving toward her at great speed. The sounds were its footfalls, and as she began to feel the vibrations of them shut her up from the ground into her legs, she realized that the thing must be massive. She looked in the direction it seemed to be coming from, and that was when she saw the eyes. Pale, luminous blue eyes, bounding up and down, as whatever it was raced toward her. She didn't have long to wait. In moments, a dim outline of a shape became visible. It was bipedal and running upright. As more light glanced off it, she thought it resembled a giant cat, like a jaguar, but its motion was unnatural. It was too stiff in its motion, like a robot she had seen once in some movie. Suddenly, the eyes of the thing became much brighter, lancing out painfully bright cones of light to the spot where she stood, frozen. There was a commanding male voice which shouted at her, but it spoke in a language unlike any she had ever heard before. It continued to approach, and soon it was towering over her. The commanding voice gave way to something else, an expression of surprise? Jackie didn't know what was being said, but the giant cat seemed to be genuinely at a loss to understand what it had found. This belief was further confirmed a few moments later, when the creature, or robot, or whatever it was, went down thunderously to one knee and bowed its head toward her. The portion of the thing's knee which crossed into the circle of light where she stood appeared to be made of some smooth metal, all black. The voice sounded like it was coming from a speaker somewhere in its chest, but although it sounded amplified, it did not strike her as alien. It only sounded like a drive-thru burger flipper from Shanghai whose manager had cranked the speakers up to 11. The voice continued to mutter unintelligibly, but he now sounded like he was pleading for some reason. Jackie continued to stand completely still, uncertain what the protocol might be in such a situation. She didn't have long to wait. Before long, there was a tremendous volley of those footfalls approaching from the same direction that the first RoboCat had come. Okay, she thought. It's a stupid name, but it'll have to do until I think of a better one. She desperately needed something she could wrap her brain around. Soon, a squadron of the RoboCats thundered up to her. They were all identical, 15 feet tall or more, of gleaming black metal with glowing blue eyes, all except for one. The unique cat was slightly taller than the others. It was gleaming white and made of a metal which seemed to gently fluoresce, and its eyes were pink. All the black RoboCats performed the same maneuver as the first one, dropping to one knee. The white cat remained standing. The black cat closest to it raised one hand, and for a moment Jackie felt hysteria threatening to take hold and thought the black cat was going to pet the white one. And then a panel folded outward from the white cat's back, and a young woman stepped gingerly out of it into the waiting hand. And suddenly Jackie understood. These were some kind of vehicles or uniforms, black and blue for guys, white and pink for girls. Of course, since there had never been such a thing on Earth before, combined with a peculiar language, this forced her to accept the reality of a conclusion which had been steadily growing in her head. "We're not in Kansas anymore, Toto," Jackie muttered to herself. The young woman had stepped down from the proffered hand and was slowly and warily, Jackie thought, approaching her. If it were not for the odd lingo and the giant RoboCats, she could have been any pretty young thing from a movie of the week. She did not appear alien at all. Though her features were difficult to classify, she was smiling and appeared peaceful. She approached Jackie and leaned forward. She was squinting slightly, as though she were listening or concentrating, but she didn't appear to like what she was hearing or not hearing. The stranger reached out her hand, slowly. Jackie thought, I hope that shaking hands isn't an insult here or something, before reaching out her own the same way. The woman resumed smiling slightly, and her fingers brushed Jackie's. Thunder tore the sky asunder, and a bolt of pain coursed through Jackie's head. She clenched her eyes shut, certain that the agony would split her head in two. And then, suddenly, the pain was gone as quickly as it had come, and she was looking up at the young woman from a prone position, lying on the ground. She blinked away the tears of pain which filled her eyes, and realized that it was suddenly full daylight. Had she been unconscious? She had no sense of how much time may have passed. The young woman was weeping profusely and rambling on melodically in her incoherent language. The nearest male muttered something, and the woman looked over, and suddenly an expression of great relief was evident on her features. She reached out toward Jackie, who recoiled, fearing another bolt of pain. The woman began wailing inconsolably and fell to her knees in the dirt next to Jackie, repeating the same sounds over and over. Jackie sat, stunned, as she realized the sounds coming from the woman was her saying, "I so sorry," repeatedly. Jackie reached out and touched the woman's knee. She was still leery of making contact with her skin, and said, "You are sorry?" The woman stopped her crying and began nodding her head violently. She reached out her hand tentatively. Jackie looked doubtfully at the extended hand for a moment, and then thought to herself, "We're all broken," and grabbed the outstretched hand. In the very next instant, she was in her bed, in the house where she had lived when she was little more than a baby, the house where her mother had lived, before she and her father had been forced to move away from there. She could smell the soft, flowery aroma of her mother's perfume, and the vaguely plastic smell of the toys scattered across the floor. It was dark, but she could still see the reassuring glow of the Donald Duck nightlight on the wall next to the door. And there, sitting on the edge of her tiny little bed, was her mother, brushing Jackie's hair back from her eyes and caressing her forehead with her cool hand. "Don't cry, Jacqueline," her mother said, and suddenly the horrible nightmare was as fresh as if she had dreamed it only moments before instead of 20 years ago. The horrible octopus, with its rubbery, hairy tentacles, grabbing her and squeezing her and pinching her and poking her and biting her and telling her, "You shut up and don't make a sound or I'll really give you something to cry about." And how she tried and tried to get away, and how scared she was that he would hurt her bad or hurt her mama. The sounds of yelling and breaking glass all swirling around in her head. She remembered the octopus got tired and went away, and then her sweet mama had come and had kissed away her tears and told her everything would be all right, that the octopus would never hurt her again, and that they would be safe, and they would go to live with Nana. And here Jacqueline lay, now looking out through the eyes of this tiny little girl, with a mind that had learned 20 more years' worth of what the world had to offer, seeing the red mark on the side of her mother's face, and the swelling under her mother's eye, as she softly cried with her little girl, and sang her a lullaby to soothe her, while she tried to figure out what to do. In that moment, frozen in time, the last time little Jacqueline ever saw her beloved mother. Jacqueline's mother sang her song, words forgotten long ago, and she recognized it now as a Pink Floyd song that her mother had changed the words in to make it a proper lullaby. "Hush now, baby, baby, don't you cry. Mama's gonna make all of the bad go away. Mama's gonna stay here with you every day. Mama's gonna keep you right here under her wing. She'll teach you to fly and she'll teach you to sing. Mama's gonna keep baby cozy and warm. Ooh, babe. Ooh, babe. Ooh, babe. Of course Mama's not gonna let you fall." With this door to this fragile moment in her distant past swinging open, and with Jacqueline weeping profusely, the vision faded. Through vision distorted by tears, Jacqueline could see the woman, earnestly searching her face, looking for something. Racked with sobs, she managed to say to her, "You did that? You touched my mind? You found that memory of my mama?" The woman reacted to this last word. "Mama," she said. "Mama comes. Wait." Jacqueline had no idea what to make of this. Mama comes? My mama? Or her mama? Am I dead? Am I going to see my mama? No matter what it meant, she couldn't go anywhere, even if she wanted to, and she didn't want to. She wasn't sure what would happen next, but the memory was powerful, and she was still in shock. "I'll wait," she said. The young woman's countenance brightened, and she nodded, smiling. She stood up, wiping her own eyes, leaving Jacqueline on the ground as she walked over toward the black cats and began speaking again in her own language. Jacqueline simply lay there, utterly stunned. Had her mother been killed, and the knowledge been kept from her all these years? A deep core of anger kindled at the possibility of this as she pondered the implications. That was when, from the direction of the mirror, a deafening cacophony split the tranquil air. Jacqueline looked toward the sound just in time to see a blue convertible Cadillac emerge from the mirror. It hurtled toward them as if Satan himself were at the wheel with all the heavenly host in pursuit. But no, she realized, it wasn't Satan at all. It was Kurt. She rolled aside and looked up in time to see the steel monstrosity run the young woman down. Jacqueline had attended a therapy session once. They had called it primal scream therapy. It had been explained to her as involving the act of conjuring up the most powerful, painful, or angry emotions you could summon and venting them in an explosion of the loudest, most primitive noise you could make. It had seemed to her utter nonsense at the time, but she could not deny that it had been the loudest expression of pain she had ever heard. But of course, the people there assembled had not each had a 15-foot mechanical robot cat suit with its own built-in public address system. The outcry of the males was deafening. Their response was terrifying. First, the closest cat swiped with one hand at the vehicle, and the 2-ton caddy tumbled end over end across the field as if it were nothing more than a hollow plastic toy. The mangled body of the female beneath it was revealed, twisted and broken in the place where the car had sat moments before. The cats then unleashed a barrage of energy emanating from their fists. The caddy was instantly incinerated. No occupant could have survived the resulting conflagration, but the cats were not satisfied. They continued to roast the car until the very frame of it pooled into molten steel, scorching the field all around it. Only then did they turn their attention from the glowing remains of the newcomer. Jacqueline watched as the cats marched back toward her, surrounding her in a rough circle. And though she didn't know it, and without daring to speak aloud, she echoed the sentiment which would be uttered by a cameraman in a makeshift studio in Denver some 26 hours later, as the bereaved men in their armored suits sought answers and justice for their fallen princess. I think I may be in trouble. End of part 3.